This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. Hi, I'm Charlie Greenawalt, the Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mara Donnelly, as usually. Hi, welcome, Mara.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, there's no shortage of things happening on Capitol Hill in Harrisburg these days, are there?
That's for sure. A lot of interesting stories.
Who would believe that we'd have so much news so close to the holidays?
Yeah, that's not usual. Mostly people are out shopping, but not right now.
Well, normally people go to the Pennsylvania Society, right?
It's a lot. It was earlier this week, so yeah.
And they're tired from that, and they send a few cards, and we normally don't have the situation where we have the Inspector General's report has come out regarding the Lieutenant Governor.
Yes.
And what's in it?
We don't know.
We don't know, and are we going to get to see it?
Apparently not.
I'm
guessing there will be a few lawsuits over that. So
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Well, we have someone here to talk about that and much more. We're very fortunate to have with us today Paul Mango. Paul, you are running for Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we can't thank you enough for stopping by and spending time with us and our viewers.
My pleasure.
I guess the first question to you would have to be, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
And where'd you come from, and why did you decide to do something so unusual as running for and challenging as running for Governor of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on the show. And one of my opponents likes to say I come from nowhere, and I say, no, I came from nothing. And it actually started with my granddad coming from Italy to here a little bit over 100 years ago by himself. He was 14, couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't speak English, had no money, and had this big dream in his heart of America. And I settled up in the northeast part of the Commonwealth in Susquehanna County, worked on the railroad for several decades. I'm the product of Italian-Irish Catholic parents, one of 5 siblings. We grew up in a home where all 5 of us shared one bathroom, and 2 of my brothers and I had one of the rooms. My poor sister, there's four boys and 1 girl, but you know what, it was a wonderful, wonderful family and a wonderful upbringing. My dad was in the National Guard when I was a child and had a big influence on me. So when I was 18, I went off to West Point, the only place I applied, and very fortunate to get in. I think I got a bonus when I was there, and that is I met my wife. So she is class of 1982. I'm class of 81.
she was in West Point as well.
Yes, she was.
That's very cool.
And one of the first women to have graduated. She was in the 3rd class. No women had graduated before she arrived. We went off and did our service time, had a great time down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then we were over in Europe for a couple of years when we were still in the midst of the Cold War.
Well, I believe that, in fact, when you graduated from West Point, you had a special person hand you your diploma, didn't you?
Yeah, President Ronald Reagan. It was a brilliantly sunny day. I remember it. It was 40 years ago. And he had a 45-minute address, but it was basically, thank you for serving your country, and we're going to make you proud of it again. And boy, did he, over his 8 years in office. This was right after he was shot, so 2 months after he had the assassination attempt. But we had a great time in the service, and when we finished our service time, I went straight from Germany back to Harvard Business School. And I remind people that the business school's on the right side of the Charles, the right bank of the Charles, not the left bank. Got to keep that straight.
Well, these days, that's important to note.
Yes, it is. How to remind folks. And then I came to Pittsburgh with a great firm called McKinsey & Company, one of the best global advisory firms around. And I worked, led a team over what eventually became 25 years and built a global healthcare business. We did work in about 35 different countries and had the opportunity to study and be involved with huge regulatory disruptions such as Obamacare. And along the way, my wife and I had 5 daughters, the joys of my life, ages 30 down to age 14, so it's a pretty big spread.
Oh, wow.
Amelia's out in Silicon Valley doing something in the high-tech world, and Hope, our second daughter, actually followed Mom and Dad to West Point, graduated in 2014, and she has been over in South Korea for the last 16 months, and she is due home on December 30th, so we'll be very happy to have her home. I have one in New York City, working in financial services. I have one in college here in Pennsylvania, and I still have a 14-year-old at home. So I think in summary, we've lived a very blessed life. I've been the big beneficiary of the American dream. And that gets us to why I'm doing this.
Let's get to why.
Why I'm doing this. I've spent 14 months driving 70,000 miles across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I have to say, there are a lot of our fellow citizens out there who no longer share the belief and no longer have the confidence that they can achieve the types of dreams that I was the beneficiary of. And I was asked several times to go to the government as a young partner at McKinsey & Company, and I never found the opportunity for impact that could be anywhere close to what leading what I call the turnaround of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania could be. So if folks like us don't step up, we are where we are, and I think it's a real obligation and a return to public service that my wife and I decided we'd pursue. That's why we're doing it.
And how do the girls feel?
The girls are doing great. Now, one of them is out of the country. Two of them are out of the Commonwealth. One is participates with the Young Republicans on campus, where she is, which is good. And the other one is running an Instagram account on behalf of the campaign for our dog Tucker, our golden retriever, who's a very popular figure in the campaign if you follow us on Facebook. And so she's very involved, and she's been out on some trips with me. And my wife has a full-time career, and she's still raising our 14-year-old, so she doesn't come across the state as much, but she was at the PA Society in New York and met several hundred folks and had a great time, and was at the Army-Navy game, meeting a lot of folks from the campaign too just last week. So we're having a lot of fun.
And as we talked about off camera, you're very happy at the result this year that Army was able to win for the last 2 years. And
we call it a streak, Charlie. It's a streak. It's a streak.
Turn around that Navy tide that had been there for so long. Could you tell our viewers what your vision for the Commonwealth would be? You start out your campaign booklet that Mara and I have copies of here, with a long article or essay, if you will, about William Penn and William Penn's vision of Pennsylvania. I found that very interesting because we don't find too many of our lawmakers referencing William Penn anymore.
Yeah, well, he sought liberty, as did many of his colleagues at the time when they came to Pennsylvania. And as I said, I've spent 14 months talking to thousands of Pennsylvanians in hundreds of meetings, and they feel oppressed by an overreaching government from a regulatory standpoint, from a mandate standpoint, from a tax standpoint. They are disappointed with the dysfunction here. I mean, Exhibit A has to be the budget process that we just went through. So we started without a vision. I've never been associated with a large organization whose chief executive doesn't start with a vision of the future. Where are we headed? No wonder we wound up all tied up in our socks, right? And then you had a situation where we wound up signing a revenue bill, an expense bill, before we knew where the revenue was coming from. We went 122 days into it. The legislature was on vacation for half that time. We got a downgrade that cost us $50 million. We had tremendous uncertainty. Businesses that didn't know whether they were going to get paid. Some of them didn't. Parents who were facing potentially mid-year tuition increase of $3,000 or $4,000. And then we wind up with a budget that basically depends on Pennsylvanians smoking more, drinking more, gambling more, and borrowing $1.5 billion from our future. So I can understand why the folks out there in Pennsylvania are quite upset about this dysfunction. So our vision is very simple. I don't think we have a democracy if people don't have dreams. If they don't have dreams of economic mobility, of bettering themselves, of their children being better off. And by the way, our children are largely leaving. So we have this sub-theme about let's bring our jobs and our children back home. But this lays out how we can get there. And here's the good news. It's within our grasp. We have everything we need to be wonderfully successful. We lack real leadership in the chief executive, and we cannot continue to pursue, and I know this sounds harsh, a liberal, progressive, socialist agenda and expect to lift people's fortunes in the Commonwealth. So I'm going to address both of those, and I think we have a very bright future. That's my agenda.
You sound very much like one of your competitors in the race for governor, similar ideas. And how would you distinguish yourself from those that you will be running against?
Yeah. Well, first of all, no one else has had the leadership experience and training that I've had. No one else has had the relevant business experience. So my experience, 25 years at McKinsey, was working with very large, multi-billion dollar, often multinational companies, and changing their direction. We were change leaders. That's what we did. I mean, I was a healthcare guy, but it was change leaders. I don't think anyone else has the sense of obligation that I just talked about. And I know no one else has a plan. Ask them where it is. They can't put it in writing. I think every Pennsylvanian deserves to know what the candidate would do if he or she were elected governor. I think it's very basic. So we feel very good about the way we differentiate ourselves from our opponents, and we're probably a little bit different from a temperament standpoint as well.
Are the Republicans, of course you're running for the Republican nomination, and
Yep.
some of your opponents would include, for example, Senator Scott Wagner from York County, a very successful business person, Laura Ellsworth, the lawyer from Pittsburgh, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai. It sounds like a bruising competition. When that primary is over, will the Republican candidate have the resources and wherewithal left to wage an effective campaign against an incumbent governor?
Yeah, see, we view it slightly differently. I'm sure it'll be a spirited campaign, and we're looking forward to that. But what a tremendous way to prepare us to go up against Tom Wolf, right? I'm relatively new to this game. I'm enjoying mixing it up with the folks and learning, because I want to be ready when May 15th comes to pivot right into the general election. And I view this, we're going to have several debates coming up. And I view this as wonderful preparation for the general election. So we welcome it. It'll be spirited. We'll try to keep it as clean as possible. If we get punched, we're going to punch back very hard. But we're not going to initiate anything.
Typically, governors, presidents, are all assessed after their first 100 days in office.
Yeah.
You are a visionary and you like to look forward, so let me ask you this question. Your first 100 days comes and the press is going to start writing the story. What do you want your accomplishments to be in those first 100 days?
Yeah, first of all, you know where that came from, that saying, the 100 days?
No.
Napoleon returning to France in 1814 and making it up to Waterloo within 100 days of the time he went back into office. Anyway, that's where they came
Learn
from.
something new.
But I think 2 or 3 things that'll be very important. One is that'll be budget season, the first 100 days. I want to deliver a budget that is comprehensive, sound, and very much reflects the priorities of the people of Pennsylvania. How would I do that? I've already talked about it. I'd work closely with county commissioners, mayors on both sides of the aisle, township supervisors, and we'd come up, hey, listen, if we're $1 billion short, guys, let's roll up our sleeves. No one takes credit, no one gets the blame. Let's set our priorities and let's deliver a sound budget proposal to the legislator.
Okay.
Right? Okay, that would be number 1. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, he's not done yet.
Yeah, 2 is we have an urgent issue that our governor has not addressed. It's called drug overdose epidemic. Opioids. 100 people a week dying. I cannot believe he has not declared a statewide emergency and put the resources, time, and leadership behind it to address that level of destruction. I think very, very important. And third, I would begin in that first 100 days to radically change the culture in Harrisburg from one that right now is very oppressive and very top-down to one that understands it's there to serve the people. Those are the 3 things I want to get done in the first 100 days.
I was going to go. In fact, I'm glad you referenced the opioid crisis. You've spent your whole career in the healthcare field.
Right.
What specific measures do you think we need to take to deal with the opioid issue?
Yeah, and let's give the governor credit. He's already begun to address this from a clinical perspective. That is, from a prescribing perspective. And is that part of the issue? It's absolutely part of the issue. But this is a bigger social issue. I call it diseases of despair. There are a lot of folks out there who feel isolated. They don't have dreams anymore. They don't know where their next job is coming from. They see their health care premiums and their property taxes going up beyond their reach, right? And they feel disillusioned. So this is a big social issue that no one is addressing yet, and it's a criminal issue. There's a lot of illicit drugs coming in, and why would our governor at the same time, prevent over-prescriptions, but also eliminate, or at least propose elimination of minimum mandatory sentences for drug dealers? It's incoherent to me. So I think the most important thing is to take a much broader view of what this problem is. It's not just a clinical issue. But 2, I view this, the analogy I would use is terrorism. And what I mean by that is, if you see something, say something. I think we need to build awareness amongst the population about how dangerous these drugs are. I mean, my daughter had an emergency appendectomy in August, the 14-year-old. They wanted to give her, they had 30 Oxycontin pills. If my wife and I hadn't been aware of what was going on, and I think a lot of Pennsylvanians still are not, we wouldn't have been nearly as vigilant, right? So I think this is about a huge awareness building campaign so that Pennsylvanians can take care of themselves and be aware of the dangers that they face when they're given these types of painkillers.
Well, I think we have about a minute left,
Okay.
so I'm going to ask the last question. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give Maura a chance, please,
yes.
Charlie.
Well, you
Jeez.
mentioned the changing the culture.
Yeah.
We've had some recent stories about legislators. We've got the serious culture issue overall. What can we be done about it? What can be done to make sure that everyone feels safe working in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, the number one thing any leader can do is role model the behavior he or she seeks. So I think that's vitally important. I am very disturbed by these allegations. I grew up in a family with 5 daughters and a very strong, independent wife who made her way through a male-dominated world with extraordinary success. And just, it absolutely breaks my heart to think that this still exists today. And I know that sounds naive, but in the environments where I participated, there was zero tolerance for this behavior, and I'm just a bit astounded that we don't have the same thing here in Harrisburg.
Well, Mr. Mango, I'm sorry we're out of time.
Okay.
We want to invite you back.
Sure.
So we've just begun to scratch the surface,
Yes.
I think, here.
Where can people get more information?
Oh, yes. Please go to our website. It's www.mango4pa.com. That's F-O-R, not the number 4.
Okay.
And they can download a whole bunch of materials and sign up on Facebook as well. You can follow us around the Commonwealth.
Okay, we will be back after just a minute, and we'll continue our discussion.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to the second half of Behind the Headlines. On this half of Behind the Headlines, Maura and I have a candidate for lieutenant governor. We just had met Mr. Mango and talked about the gubernatorial race. Now we're switching parties and going down to the second spot on the ticket to lieutenant governor. And we have a candidate in Craig Lehman from Lancaster County. Craig, you are entering something that's wild and woolly. Here we have an incumbent lieutenant governor who indicates he's going to run for re-election in Michael Stack, former Senator Stack. And he had a few bumps along the way recently. And now there's quite a few people that have thrown their hat in the ring to run against him, you included. May we ask why you have decided to run for lieutenant governor?
Well, I've been increasingly disenchanted as a former budget analyst. I worked for the state legislature for about 15 years of how the Commonwealth has been dealing with its fiscal challenges. It seems that the legislature, for the most part, is in favor of deficit spending, and having served as county commissioner in Lancaster for 10 years, we've had 6 budgets in a row that have been adopted without a structural deficit, and we've just had our credit rating increase. And I think that there needs to be more reasoned voices in Harrisburg on the fiscal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about your background. You mentioned you had 15 years as a budget analyst, but tell us sort of the road that brought you to this point and this decision.
Well, I served a term on Lancaster City Council. I was city controller for a couple of years, and I've been a county commissioner in Lancaster since 2008. My education is, I have a bachelor's degree in public administration from Shippensburg University, and I have a master's degree from Penn State in policy analysis. And I also served the United States Navy from 1981 to 1985.
Well, you certainly have seen in your service both at the Capitol as a staffer, and then with the city of Lancaster, and then with the county of Lancaster. You've seen Pennsylvania's problems across the board. What do you consider to be Pennsylvania's major problems at this point, Craig? What should the state government be working hardest to address?
Well, I do think that the state government needs to focus on its fiscal position. When you have deficits year after year after year, and you sort of get to the position where it's almost like Groundhog's Day, where the same thing happens year after year after year, and that doesn't really result in any confidence in Pennsylvania. And I think that can have ripple effects throughout our community, particularly in the private sector, with people who want to invest in Pennsylvania. And I just think that we all need to just understand that if we're gonna make a decision about spending, we need to figure out how together we're going to pay for that spending, and also make sure that we're being efficient with every dollar that we spend. And I just think there hasn't been enough of that in Harrisburg over the last many years.
Well, there are certainly a variety of other issues that are out there on the horizon, I guess. How would you've seen as a county commissioner the problems that we have with opioids. How would you deal with that at the state level, were you Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about what we've done in Lancaster County. Earlier this year, Lancaster County Board of Commissioners endorsed the Joining Forces effort. It's a collaborative effort with stakeholders throughout Lancaster County, service providers, law enforcement, the medical community, the Lancaster County's Drug and Alcohol Commission, a whole range of folks who are committed to trying to figure out how we can pool our collective resources to actually have an impact on this terrible epidemic that is having such a devastating impact in our communities. So I would like to see, to the extent that you can do that at state level, to try and figure out what collaborative processes we can put in place to help to deal with not only the opioid epidemic, but perhaps other issues that are facing Pennsylvania. Because what I found in Lancaster County is that when Lancaster County moves forward with a collaborative effort, it allows us to be efficient with our resources, but I think it also increases the probability that we can be successful in addressing the concerns that are in front of us.
You mentioned how it is you plan to conduct yourself while you're there, which is refreshing in this day and age. What are going to be your top priority issues that you're going to want to just throw yourself into right away?
Well, for me, fiscal responsibility. I've said when I ran for commissioner the first time in 2007, I always said your budget is your number one policy document. It says a lot about who you are and what your aspirations are. The other thing I'll say is that when it comes to budgeting, I've always believed very strongly that if you don't manage your budget will manage you. And I think that's what we see at the state level. At the state level, there really aren't a lot of choices because there hasn't really been what I would say a collaborative approach between the legislature and the administration sometimes, in terms of trying to figure out what's the best for Pennsylvania in terms of our fiscal health and our overall future for Pennsylvania. So I'm going to focus on fiscal responsibility. It's been my strength my entire career, and I always feel that that's always the best place to start.
Okay, great.
Craig, Pennsylvania has an interesting electoral arrangement in that the nominees of the two parties for governor and lieutenant governor run together in the general election. But in the primary process, it's a free-for-all, and there are no unified tickets. There are some pundits that believe we should be changing that system now. For example, Governor Rendell and his lieutenant governor, Kathy Baker Knoll, never seemed to mesh very well. And we're wondering, what are your thoughts on this? Should lieutenant governors and governors run as a unified ticket, even in the primary, or not? How do you look at this?
I think in terms of running on a unified ticket in the primary is really up to the gubernatorial candidate and the lieutenant governor candidate. As far as the process in terms of selecting a lieutenant governor candidate, I'm a little concerned about the rush to take voters out of the equation. I know there's been some who have said recently they'd prefer to have the gubernatorial candidate select their running mate. But at least in Pennsylvania, voters, both Republican and Democrat, do have some say in who their lieutenant governor candidate nominee is. And I think that voter input is important. And not sure that I want to see that necessarily be shifted to what could be, in some cases, a backroom deal.
Well, Maura, you have the last question. We have 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Who in the field of lieutenant governor candidates do you think is the person to beat?
Well, I think we're going to find that out. I think it's too early to tell, quite frankly. I think there's
there's so many different characters.
Well, let's just say that there's a lot of diversity
Yes.
in the Democratic primary.
Very diplomatic way of putting it.
For lieutenant governor. I do think that everybody's going to have to build on their strengths, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm probably never going to be the flashiest candidate, but I do like to believe that I have, given the qualifications and experience that I have, that I can get my message out effectively. And I've always believed that no one can outwork me, so we're going to have to wait and see whether that's true or not.
So you might be the one to beat.
Well, that's for someone else to decide.
Okay.
I'm going to go back on my word. A yes,
Oh.
no answer.
If I can.
Inspector General's report on Lieutenant Governor Stack. It's not going to be made public. Do you approve of that or disapprove of that? You think it should be made public? Yes or no?
I'll give you the same answer that I gave the Lancaster newspaper's reporter when he asked me that question after my announcement. I said, that's a decision for the governor.
Okay. Well, very good.
The
Well,
decision has been made.
we absolutely have just started to scratch the surface. You have a very interesting background, and we hope you'll come back and share more of your thoughts with our viewers. And we hope that we'll see you again next week on Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.